Good evening, everybody. My name is E.R. Anderson. I'm the executive director of Charis Circle. Charis Circle is the nonprofit programming arm of Charis Books, and Charis Books is the South's oldest independent feminist bookstore. I am really excited to be here tonight in celebration of The Kissing Bug, a true story of a family, an insect, and a nation's neglect of a deadly disease. We are living with daily disease right now, which is why I think that's on my brain. So we are delighted to be here with Daisy Hernández, who is the author of The Kissing Bug, and to be joined by Lupita Aquino, who is better known as Lupita Reads. Tonight's event is co-sponsored by the Feminist Women's Health Center's Lifting Latinx Voices Initiative. It is the only Latinx-led program in Georgia that focuses on addressing comprehensive reproductive and sexual health issues faced by Latinx families. For over 12 years, LLVI's innovative grassroots work has created key partnerships by providing education, outreach, and leadership development opportunities. By placing our voices, our stories, and our leadership at the center of our efforts as diverse Latinx people, we've been able to build connections and trust while strengthening the movement for reproductive justice in Georgia. That is, of course, their mission statement. And the Feminist Women's Health Center, more broadly, is a reproductive health, rights, and justice organization based here in Atlanta. They provide direct service, including abortion care, and they provide education, advocacy, and leadership development opportunities. They also build movements with people across all axes of oppression so that we have the rights, resources, and respect to make empowered, informed decisions about our bodies and health. You can learn more at feministcenter.org, and I will put that in the chat as well so folks can learn more and get involved. We're always really honored to get to work with them. And we're very honored that they wanted to be a part of this event tonight. So let me first introduce Lupita Aquino, who again is better known as Lupita Reads. She's a passionate literary enthusiast, amplifying and highlighting books written by authors of color through her Instagram blog. She currently lives in the greater Washington, D.C. area, and you can find her on Instagram at lupita.reads. She's on Twitter as well at the same handle, Lupita_reads, or you can catch her writing about books for shereads.com or via her column over at Washington Independent Review of Books. So welcome, Lupita. We are very glad you're here. And the person of the hour, yes, lots of people love your book recommendations and are always like waiting to see what you say about books. So it's a real honor to finally get to work with you. We've known about your work for a long time. And the person of the hour tonight is Daisy Hernández, who is the author of The Kissing Bug, which won the Penn Gene Stein Book Award and was selected as an inaugural title for the National Book Foundation's Science and Literature Program. The book was named a top 10 nonfiction book of 2021 by Time Magazine and was a finalist for the New American Voices Award. She has spoken about the subject of her book, Neglected Disease and Racial Disparities in Healthcare, on MSNBC and also with the Carter Center and the Pan American Health Organization. Her memoir, A Cup of Water Under My Bed, won the IPP Award for Best Coming of Age Memoir and Lambda Literary's Dr. Betty Berzon Emerging Writer Award. It was also a Charis favorite. We sold many, many, many copies to our community. So, that's still a book that folks come in for. It stays on a perennial backlist for us. So she co-edited the classic feminist anthology Colonize This, Young Women of Color on Today's Feminism, which was first published in 2002 and has become a widely taught text in women's and gender studies courses. And again, another Charis favorite. She co-edited a new edition in 2019, and the anthology has been praised by scholars and media outlets, including USA Today and BuzzFeed, for its contribution to understandings of intersectionality. So this is a very special conversation, and I'm so glad to see so many folks already saying hello in the chat. We want to encourage folks to please, if you have questions, go ahead and ask them at any point in the conversation, and Lupita will integrate them into the conversation if that makes sense. But otherwise, just kick back, have a drink, have a snack, make yourselves at home. We want this to feel like your digital living room, and enjoy your time here. We know this is going to be a deep and beautiful conversation. So thank you both so much for being with us. And thanks again to the Feminist Women's Health Center for co-sponsoring.
Well, I just wanted to say, yeah, thank you so much. A quick thank you to, again, Charis Charis Books and More, and the Feminist Women's Health Center for making this conversation possible. Daisy, I'm a huge fan of you. Honestly, like I'm so glad I got to meet you in person, and that we have connected. And you know, your book means so much to me, and so I'm deeply grateful to the folks that made this possible for me to even be able to talk to you about such an important book for me personally. And so to kick off our conversation, I know that you were going to read a little bit for us, and we would love that.
Thank you so much, Lupita. It's just such an honor for me to be in conversation with you. I know that you understand this book in multiple ways, and so it's just it's a real treat and real wonderful to like be virtual buddies beyond, you know, in-person buddies. It's awesome. So I also did want to thank Charis Books for hosting us. It's really I really want to go to your bookstore in person, so I'm hoping that that might be possible in the near future. And I also want to thank the Feminist Women's Health Center and also Tin House for organizing us. And if you hear background noise, that's like my cat trying to break into the reading tonight. She's wanting to claim her seat right next to me. So I am going to read from The Kissing Bug. And this is a book about a neglected disease called Chagas disease, or the kissing bug disease. And it is a parasitic disease that for 1 in 3 people who are infected, this parasite will attack the heart, and can even be deadly to the point that a person, you know, not only suffers from early heart failure, but can even get to the point where they need a heart transplant or lose their lives. And it is a disease that's historically been found in South America, Central America, and Mexico. In the United States, people also have this disease. We have these insects that transmit the parasite, but very, very, very low rates of transmission compared to Latin America, where there are like 6 million people who are infected. I started working on this book because I had a family member, my tia Dora, who was like a mother to me, who was diagnosed with Chagas disease. She was one of 300,000 people in the United States who are Latinx immigrants who have Chagas disease. And she lost her life to this disease. And it really, was the impetus for me to learn more about what this is, why we've neglected this disease for so long, why so few of us know about it in the US. And I wanted to read from a chapter about a woman named Janet, actually in the Washington, D.C. area, and what happened to her family. Because one of the things that I learned so much in the process of researching this book that I did not know when my auntie was alive. And one of the things that I learned is that the disease doesn't only transmit by way of these insects called kissing bugs. It can also be transmitted during pregnancy from a mother who's infected to her child. And there are some doctors who believe that we should really consider this to be a pediatric illness, because many people are infected when they're young, and this parasite can be dormant in the body for up to 3 decades before causing heart problems or gastrointestinal problems. And children can be almost essentially cured with some of the treatments that are available. Whereas for adults, once you get into that adult stage or become an adult, that curative option is not available. So there should be a huge push, in my opinion, for getting Latinx children and teenagers in the US and obviously in Latin America tested, diagnosed, and treated, because it makes such a huge difference. And so Janet did not know that she was infected, and but her baby was born prematurely and ended up in the NICU. And so I'm going to read just a few pages about her experience. In the NICU, so many tubes spiraled around Janet's baby that he looked suspended in a spider's web. A machine made his breathing possible. Somehow, despite only weighing 4 pounds, he had plenty of hair, as if 1,000 black eyelashes covered him. Every day, Janet spoke to him energetically in Spanish while he slept in the incubator. "You're strong, papito. You have to fight." Janet always went in first. The visit was 45 minutes long, then a break, then her husband, Jose, it would be his turn. Their toddler, Junior, could not go into the NICU. She and Jose took turns walking their toddler around the hospital. Janet didn't know what she ate for lunch or for dinner. The hours crowded in her mind and lost all shape. Outside the NICU, she could cry. Inside the NICU, she forced a smile. Everything she felt, her baby would feel. Everything she said, her baby would hear. She told him over and over again, "You have to fight, Papito." At night, when the awful hour came to say goodbye, she crooned to him, "Mommy and Papi are leaving now, but the nurses are going to take good care of you." She turned to the nurse and said in Spanish, "I'm leaving him in your care." Janet knew that the woman did her job well, and she was grateful, but she hoped that her words would tap at the woman's heart, that she would take care of her baby, Luis, as if he were her baby. More than 2 weeks passed. The hospital's technicians had found cysts in the placenta filled with multiple unknown microorganisms, but the tests for leishmaniasis and other diseases came back negative. CDC officials said they would need blood samples again from the baby and from Janet. The physicians, meanwhile, studied pictures of the baby's heart. The echocardiogram showed that his right ventricle, which sends blood to the lungs, was smaller than normal. So was the tricuspid valve, which keeps blood in that ventricle from backing up. The doctors continued searching and found more evidence that something had gone wrong during Janet's pregnancy. Tissue in the baby's heart had already died. The day that the medical staff collected a blood sample from Janet's baby, Donald Trump put on a tie the color of red carnations and a suit jacket too large for him. It was the Tuesday before Father's Day in 2015 and the day Trump declared his run for the presidency in what later became known as his "Mexicans are rapists" speech. Trump's words, however, did not offend Janet. She had come to the United States legally. She saw herself and her husband not like the immigrants that Trump warned about in his speech, but rather like the blue-collar white Americans that he spoke of, the women and men who were working hard and struggling to make ends meet. A week after that speech, the results came back from the CDC. Her baby, Luis, had the kissing bug disease. Janet did too. Her toddler tested negative. Stained and magnified 1,000 times in a photograph, the parasite T. cruzi from Luis's blood sample appeared like the eels with mohawks curled alongside violet globes, his blood cells. The parasite had burst from a dying cell in Luis's premature body, and with its flagellum, it was on the move, looking for new cells to invade. The parasite had already reached his heart, where it had destroyed cells in the right ventricle and left behind scar tissue. The good news was that baby Luis would not be lost. The parasite had been found. He could be treated. This made him only the second official case on record with the CDC of a baby infected with the kissing pregnancy in the United States. Luis had avoided the fate of the lost babies who are never tested, never identified. When the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists teamed up in 2008 with the CDC to survey the organization's members about their knowledge of the kissing bug disease, they pointedly asked physicians whether a mother could pass the parasite T. cruzi on to her baby, regardless of whether she had been infected during pregnancy or years before. The correct answer is yes, but 84% of OBGYNs said, "I don't know." The survey's authors observed the most common response to our survey question was, "I don't know." It was a disturbing outcome considering that almost 700,000 babies are born every year in the United States to mothers from South America, Central America, and Mexico. In 2006, the federal government convened a panel of experts to establish guidelines for states to screen newborns. And the group recommended that 29 diseases be mandated for screening, including hearing loss, cystic fibrosis, and sickle cell anemia. The kissing bug disease did not make the list, but not because it doesn't occur often. Newborns are actually screened for 15 diseases that occur less frequently than the kissing bug disease. Eileen Stillwagon, an economist at Gettysburg College and her colleagues found that it is 10 times cheaper to screen and to test newborns and their Latina moms for the kissing bug disease than it is to cover all the costs that could be related to children and their mothers having this disease later in their lives. I thought about places like Los Angeles and Miami, Chicago and Houston, Washington, D.C. and New York City, places where high numbers of Latinx families live. I thought of the less obvious places too, all over the South, like Siler City, a rural town in North Carolina where 43% of the people are from Latinx families. How many babies in these places had the kissing bug disease? One particular group of lost babies stood out to me, the girls. A girl infected with the kissing bug disease, like Janet, can grow up to pass the parasite to her children during pregnancy. In these cases, the parasite does not need the kissing bug. It hijacks the girl's body and she becomes the carrier. Thank you. I'll stop there. Ooh, that's always so intense to read. It was intense to write, but it's intense to read.
Yeah, and honestly, like it was intense reading it, and it's a whole different level of intense just listening to you read it, and then just processing at the same time. Because I think, you know, what comes to mind, of course, is immediately the recent case, Roe versus Wade, and also just the severe health disparities experienced in this case by pregnant Latinx people, right? People with a uterus that can conceive. And I want to know from you, in terms of the research you did, is the testing that difficult? You know, you mentioned it was cheaper, but I mean, how much more difficult could it be to just screen for this? And why is it not something that, why would you think it's not something that for?
Yeah. As from medical perspective, nothing's difficult, you know, if you have the test, right? And you have what the part that's difficult, which you were seeing right now with the monkeypox virus, which we saw with COVID and continue to see with COVID, is the political will, right? And the policymakers and people to implement and to carry that out. And it really takes people on the ground saying, like, we need this to happen. And with prenatal screening, it's very different because every state can decide. So it has these federal guidelines. It would be huge if the federal guidelines included Chagas disease, right? Because it would be this impetus, just like we're seeing right now with the monkeypox virus, like the fact that, like, we've got an emergency situation now, right? When the federal government declares an emergency situation, it can move things in a certain direction, right? So if the federal government said, hey, this should also be part of prenatal screening process, it would help the states to move in a certain way. But we all know we don't have to wait for anyone, right? If there are healthcare professionals and people on the ground who have the ability, the capacity, the information to say, hey, you know, our Latinx moms should be getting screened. It's not going to be everyone, but especially in these towns where like half of your town is Latinx people, right? Latinx women and men, like it makes sense. It would make sense to screen in these places and catch this early. And the treatment, it's like it can be a 2-month treatment for both mother and baby. There isn't a cure for the mom, but it can reduce the parasite load, which would hopefully mean that if she was going to have another pregnancy, that it might help to not, have transmission again. Yeah, exactly. That to pass it on. I feel like in the case of, in general, children seem to tolerate the medications much better. And in the case of Luis, he did get treatment. He got treatment as a newborn, tolerated very well. And he, is now, it just boggles my mind. 7, like, I don't know how many years just passed, but, his mother thinks he's a little skinny. The last time I talked to her, she wants like so many Latina moms, like a little plump baby. But otherwise, doing really well. And he's just honestly very lucky. There was another case, in Florida, where a young man showed up in his 20s, showed up in the ER with like signs of early heart failure, and he was otherwise a very healthy person. And it turned out that it was a case of what's called congenital Chagas disease, or the congenital kissing bug disease. And it was, he himself had never been to South America or Central America or Mexico, but his mom was infected, and he had never been screened as a child. And so here he is in his 20s now, developing heart complications because of this parasite. So no, it's all about that was like one of the big lessons that I learned in working on this book. I don't have a background in science or medicine, so it was all new to me, or public health.
Right.
And it's shocking. I think we're all experts now, but it's shocking how much it's about, what will people on the ground make happen.
Yeah, absolutely.
And empower.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I thought when I was thinking about our conversation, I was thinking, about your background and, how a lot of this is, science-based in biology and epidemiology and public health related. And as someone that, is a public health servant, like I know what it's like to try to just transverse the field, and especially coming from a clinical trials, clinical research background, how difficult it is to even be more than just someone taking notes in the room, right? And so did you find at all that difficult, just trying to find information and like talk to people and have people talk to you? How did that go?
Yeah, it was really difficult. And so because I didn't have that background, I didn't have some, very basic, context for working on this. And I am very grateful that I almost didn't know what I was undertaking, and that scared me away.
That's good. No, you're right. You're absolutely right.
Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's good to not know what you're starting to do. But also, I mean, I think that I'm also part of like a lineage of, Latinx writers who, if we don't write about these issues, no one else is going to write about them. And for me, what felt really enraging was that when I started looking for a book for a general audience, I couldn't find one. I could find academic articles and scholarly work, but I couldn't find one that was narrative driven. I couldn't find one that included voices of other families in a more, sort of expanded way, right? Like there would be like little bits of people's stories, but not like full. Like I want to know what you're feeling and what you're thinking in that moment, and I couldn't find any of that, and I just thought, it's sort of I think the words of Toni Morrison that so many of us writers of color live by, which is like, she said, she wrote The Bluest Eye because she needed to read that book and it didn't exist. So she wrote it. And I think just so many of us live by her words, we don't see the book, so we write it. And so that means that, I created a list of glossary like vocabulary that I didn't know about, zoonotic disease. I didn't know about that. What's that? Just really, a lot about the insect that I did not know. I did not know a lot. Pretty much like 90% of this book I did not know. So at the beginning it was, and it was also, I think you'll appreciate this, it was also not only a vocabulary of medical terms and scientific terms, but also in Spanish and English as well, right? Because I would read them in Spanish and be like, is this a Spanish word I don't know, or a medical word that I don't know?
Right.
So
No, absolutely. I mean, and it's, when we talk, I'm still coming through. I see myself. Can everybody else see me?
Oh, okay. It might be my internet. So
okay,
I can hear you though.
Yeah. You can hear me? Okay. Okay, good.
Yeah.
Okay. We're good. So, I think a lot of your book is really about raising awareness, and like we're talking about now. Do you think that has changed now that your book is out? Do you feel like there's been, just for you personally, has been any more like awareness in the general population about this disease? Because I know so many people don't know about it, but it's extremely prevalent.
Yeah. It's the word prevalent is interesting. How do we measure? There's sort of specific ideas, I think, within the public health community, and they would not consider it prevalent. But within the Latinx community, I think that it is huge, because 300,000 people in the U.S. and 6 million mostly in Latin America is a really significant number. But it's also a disease that will stay contained to this community, right? It's not transmissible. the way that COVID is, right? It's not airborne, so people don't have to worry about it. They actually can neglect it or make that choice in certain ways if they're not part of this community. I do think there's more awareness, I think, right now around the medical providers and people who work in the medical field. And part of that is the CDC did allocate this $500,000 grant and created a task force. It actually ended up being in Texas. And so there's been and as part of that, what they've done is offer more of these continuing credit classes. So I definitely think that has raised a lot of awareness. And when I spoke the last time, when I started working on this book, I talked to the CDC, and it was one of the things that they told me early on was, people end up finding out when they donate blood, because they do screen your blood donations the first time that you donate blood. And so, when I started working on this book, they were like, oh, people themselves call us because they're really worried about this. And the last time that I talked to the CDC, it's like, oh, medical providers and people are calling us now, and they're like getting informed and getting ahead of it. And I've seen a bit of that shift, but the awareness is still pretty small. I definitely think, and I can tell because when the book came out last year, and we're celebrating the paperback now. And when it came out, I really noticed the number of like healthcare reporters, and people who are used to covering different kinds of infectious diseases, saying, either they would either say, I never heard about this, I can't believe that I've never heard about this, or like, I'm so glad someone finally wrote a book about it because I'd come across it and wanted to know more. And so the fact that the media is always like a good indication to me too of how much people know out in the world. Yeah.
Right. I mean, I think the thing that comes to mind too is that a lot of people don't realize, although you can't, maybe it's contained within a community, the community grows, and these folks in the community go into the health system, right? And so that's the impact that you're going to feel as someone who it's a secondary impact. And so, I kind of want to talk to you a little bit about when we talk about disease awareness, and the implications of that in medical research and the investment of treatment for the disease. Like, could you talk to us a little bit about how lack of awareness might impact those two things and how it might come hand in hand?
Yeah, and actually, I'm really glad that you're mentioning these secondary impacts to other people, because there's only so many stories that you can include in the book without making it like a 700-page or like a 2-volume saga. And actually, one of the cases that I did not get to include, but that it has an impact, is the case of a doctor. Actually, this was in Virginia, and he had a patient who he was actually able to diagnose with Chagas disease, and he was actually having heart failure, and before they could even explore any treatments, actually his patient died, and his patient's body was being prepped for organ transplantation. You don't want a patient with Chagas disease, you don't want their organs to be transplanted, because the parasite can hide in all parts of the body. And so you're transplanting infected organs. And it was just, it was a really harrowing situation where, just the fact that he actually found out that this was happening and was able to it was one of those moments in the movies kind of situation, right? Where the doctor's running to the phone. And exactly, stop, But the way he told me was he was just so horrified. It was people not knowing, right? It was that lack of awareness of the disease itself that could have put someone else's life in jeopardy, who has nothing to do, with this particular community. Part of what I talk about in the book is that, this sort of the what I call the elite, or the epidemiological elite, right? We think we're okay because we have health insurance through our jobs, for example, like a very typical example. But studies have shown, if you live in an area where there's a high number of people without insurance, without access, their own choices of doctors begin to leave, right? Hospitals begin to close, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you do end up being affected in terms of like when you be able to go get a mammogram, and that also ties to rate as well, So women use these clinics for a whole array of reproductive and health needs. And when these places are forced out of particular states, I mean, it's all women and all people across the board who lose, So yeah, the impact of neglecting particular and of saying, oh, we don't have to pay attention to that, it ends up like affecting all of us. And something that I didn't explore in the book is also, just the psychological impact of like knowing that you live in a country, in a world where you have to like have a particular kind of access to healthcare, and like that, maybe the disease that you're afflicted with will get attention, but not this other person's. Like, it just creates a scarcity model that we're living in around really what should be a basic human right, our access to care for our health.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think I always think about, for me personally, like, not just the, like, is it me? Like, what will happen to me? Just like, how will this impact everything else? And we see it with COVID. Like, although we might be, unicorns and not have had COVID, that does not mean that our communities aren't impacted in some way. And so our surrounding communities. Absolutely. So you mentioned research, and something that I really thought a lot about is like, one of the biggest things that you mentioned people struggled with, your aunt struggled with, was stigmatization. And I was just wanted to know about the impact and your ability to get the families to speak with you about, this disease that they were going through. How did you navigate that?
Yeah, it really varied from family to family. So for some and I did not include every family that I spoke to, because again, trying to keep it manageable. And so, for some families, so for my auntie, she came to the United States around 1980. And for her, there was, she didn't necessarily experience stigma. And we don't know if that was partly because she kept it hidden for so many years.
Right. Yeah.
Her coworkers did not know why she was sick. They actually, when they came to her funeral, they thought she'd had cancer and just didn't want anyone to know. So she kept it very private. And part of that, I think, had to do with the fact that she was so aware of her immigration status. She had overstayed a tourist visa, essentially. And so I think she was really aware of not necessarily being wanted or welcomed. I also think, as the 1980s unfolded and we had the AIDS epidemic, just anyone who had a disease that was not understood, it was just a lot of fear. Like, I think for those of you who are not around, I was a kid back then. It was kind of like those first, 2 or 3 months of COVID, and very and lasting over several years. Like, it was just there was just so much fear and stigmatization that we didn't necessarily see with COVID, but just in terms of people's fears and panic, it was a lot of that. And so I think for her, that's what she experienced. But certain families that I interviewed had never heard of this disease. Like, they knew the insects. There's one man that I do write about in the book. He's like, hey, there's two, and the insects have different nicknames depending on what country you're in. And so he's from Mexico, and he's like, they're all called chinches, but there's little chinches, and there's the big chinches.
And there's the big, yep.
And he's like, the little chinches are okay. And I think he's essentially talking probably about bed bugs, fleas, etc.
Yeah.
But but the big chinches are the kissing bugs, and he's like, you don't want those. And so it's really interesting that even though he didn't know about Chagas disease, right? For me, it really says a lot about how information around disease and health is passed through generations. And it was like, avoid the big ones. Like, they knew something was up, right, with the big ones. And so in some families, there was no stigma because they didn't even know about the disease. And in other places of Latin America, the rates are so high in certain countries and certain regions of the countries that it's more like Lyme disease, and it's like almost normalized. It's like, oh, you got Lyme disease? Oh yeah, my cousin has that. My father has that. it's like and so it's a different kind of public health battle because it's so deeply normalized that people don't feel like they have to do something different, you know, and they don't necessarily know about how children and teenagers are affected. So it's like a different public health battle. But in terms of getting families to talk to me, I think it made a huge difference that I was speaking Spanish.
Right.
My limited Spanglish vocabulary with my terrible accent from US education Spanish. But I think it made a huge difference. And I think the fact that I had a family member, I have actually 2 family members who lost their lives to this disease, made it possible. Like at least the families knew that I had a personal connection. And so they never said to me, I'm willing to talk to you for this reason. But I suspect that it made it easier. I guess that's what I should say. And I definitely did present it to the families. I definitely presented this project to them as what it was for me, which is that, like, I want to raise awareness about this disease. I feel like people need to know, especially medical professionals that have Latinx patients should know about this disease. And so there were definitely, like Janet, she spent a lot of time with me. And it was really because what she experienced with her baby was such a shock to her. She's like one of these like kind of healthy nuts, you know, like she was like super healthy, had never
her whole
been
pregnancy,
sick, always
right?
at the gym. Yeah. I mean, she had just never been sick as a person. She considered herself to be so healthy. And so it was such a shock to her. And I think for her also, it wasn't a stigma, but I think also the really painful part was the perception that she had made her baby sick, that she was sick, and that she had, and like, that was like really crushing in a psychological way. So she definitely said to me more than once, like, you know, no mother should go through this. Like, women need to know, Latina women need to know that, like, that they should know, like, you know, how at risk they are and what kind of treatments are available to them and their children. So I think for her, it was wanting to be of service to others was huge.
Yeah, no, and I'm just so like amazed that you were able to include those because it just made, I feel like it just rounded the book. It just made it so perfect, even more perfect than it already was for me. And you know, I know you mentioned that there was so much information you came across that was like shocking, but I was just wondering if there's like a specific piece of information that you discovered during your research that you just were not expecting at all. Like you were just like, wow, this is a lot.
Yeah, there were so many shocks along the way. Like, I think I mentioned, I did not know about congenital Chagas. Like, I thought also it was something that I didn't know that a mother could transmit this. But definitely the most shocking part for me was finding out that in the 1940s, a medical researcher, a federal medical researcher, carried out a racist medical experiment in Texas, trying to determine if the insects that are native to the U.S. could transmit this parasite to humans. And so he went to the state asylum in Austin, and at that point, a good number of patients were suffering from schizophrenia and what we would now call bipolar disorder, and he infected at least one, and it seems like more than one, but definitely there was evidence for one young Black man who was a patient at that hospital, and he purposefully infected him with the parasitic material from the insect. And when I came across that reference, it was it was just so shocking. I mean, these are the years of the Tuskegee syphilis experiment on Black people. And so it overlaps with that. So it was very shocking. And then I, you know, through the help of librarians, I was able to look at this researcher's personal correspondence, because he actually worked at State University for many years. You know, his work was featured in the New York Times. His experiment was actually published. The last time, I haven't checked in a while, but when I was working on this book, you could find his article on this racist medical experiment without any apology, without any recognition that it's a racist medical experiment that's being described. It was just horrific. And that I did not expect to find. And when I went into his personal, I was so I think this was such a blind spot for me, to be honest with you. Like, I could not make room in my mind for the fact that it may have been more than one patient. And as I was looking through his personal correspondence, that's where I found a reference from another doctor, like just asking, like, oh, hey, what happened with those patients that that were part of the study? And that the plural, I've never been so shocked, like by like talking about like the grammar, just like, screaming at you, because I realized that I could not imagine that it had been more than one. And clearly it was more than one, even though I couldn't, he did not publish any articles about infecting other patients as well. And we don't know what happened to that patient. That patient is lost to us. He did get infected with the parasitic material. He did have a fever. His lymph nodes swelled up under his armpit. His eye swelled up where that's how the parasitic material that's how he was infected, actually, was by the parasitic material being introduced to his eye. And then the doctor at that point thought that like a year, tested him like a year, I think it was a year or 2 years later. And at that point, this is the 1940s, we do not have like antibody testing, right, for Chagas disease at that point. And so from the doctor's perspective, he's not seeing evidence of the parasites in the man's bloodstream. So he's thinking, oh, this is done now. Like his immune system has fought it off. And no, what we know now is that, like I said before, the parasite can hide all over the body. You're not actually going to find it in the bloodstream. You have to do those antibody tests. And so we don't know. We don't know if this man eventually died from heart failure. We don't know if he was one of the lucky ones that lived with the parasite and died of other causes, because many people can live with the parasite and die of other causes. We don't know what happened to him. But I think when we think about, race and inequities in the US, like, there's a reason that the Black community has so many fears, around medicine and public health. And I cannot believe that his story did not get out. That I feel very sure that like the other patients found out. The staff certainly knew what was happening. The doctors knew what was, so like, whether his own family knew, whether he knew, like, I just can't believe that word didn't get out. And, stories get passed that way over many generations.
Right. And in terms of documenting it, right, that information is just not something you can go and readily find. It's something that you personally had to dig through to know about. And you think about the long history that we probably do not know. Other than the one major, case that, we're constantly being told about, that the Tuskegee experiments. But other than that, I mean, there is a long history that unfortunately we don't know a lot about. Yeah, and that's really scary.
Absolutely. It is. It's really terrifying. And it also, because I feel like sometimes, the fears in communities of color get dismissed. Like, you have to have a study to show, like, or an article like, oh, this is why I'm scared. And it's like, no, there's a reason your grandma told you something, like, and so it makes
there's not the first thing you do, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So I'm looking at our time. I know we're running out of time quickly. If folks have a question, please feel free to ask. If not, totally okay, because I have so many more questions for you, Daisy. I really thought we were going to be able to get through them all, but I'm glad that, we get to chat. So just, I know I'm excited to be doing this with you. In terms of just like the way your book is structured, it's so beautiful. It's total goals for me. Like I fangirl over your book and just you all the time. Literally, like every week I'll just think about your book and just the structure of how you were able to like make it, weave in your family memoir and then, add in like all this information, this investigative journalism. And I just wanted to know, did you always envision writing the book in this way? And could you talk to us about the writing process?
Yeah, and I'm such a fangirl of yours, so this is really awesome because I feel like I'm watching you every day online. I feel like I know so much about you, but I know I don't. It's curated. And
I love that though.
I'm sure that I'm speaking for many when we say we're waiting for the Lupita book, the Lupita memoir, or anything you want to write. We would be excited for. but no, I did not envision this structure at all. In fact, to begin with, I did not even think about including my family story very much. Because as you know, my relationship with my tia was so complicated. We were so attached and deeply attached in certain ways. But, when I came out to her as being queer, as being bisexual, in my 20s, she stopped talking to me for many years and really shut me out of her life. And she just struggled so much with her own homophobia. And so it was weird. It was like, how do you grieve someone who we had such a complicated relationship with so in so many ways. And we reconciled before death. But we didn't reconcile because she changed. I made it did your relationship change? Like your auntie came to see the light, And it's like understand some of what was impacting her, but no, like we were able to have a relationship because I did a lot of work and wanted to have a relationship with her, even though there was an element that was very painful and difficult. So I didn't. I was like, how can I fit it? It was really fascinating, Lupita, because it was like the queer stuff. Like, do I put that in here? Like, where? How? And so I'm really grateful for my editor at Tin House, Macy Cochran, who was like, can you add more memoir? Are you interested in that? And I'm like, I can. Do you want to know more about that? And she did. Yeah. So sometimes it really just takes one reader to say, I want more. So, but even once we had the memoir part, we really struggle with the structure. I tell my students all the time now, do not stress out about it. Do not stress out about the structure. It will come even at the last moment. And it was actually Reina Grande, the wonderful memoir writer and novelist, who you know as well. She suggested some reading for me. She gave me feedback on an early draft of the book. And I was really thinking about her comments and what I was reading. And honestly, it came to me in the shower one day. I was in the shower and the book was initially called In Search of the Kissing Bug. Oh. And all of a sudden, I don't know what it is about the shower. There's just something about running water.
Magical showers.
A long time. Right, magical. Yeah, that all of a sudden I just realized it just came. It was like the last moment possible because, in terms of editorial work. And I was like, oh my gosh, like I am in search of my family story. I was in search of the medicine and the science. And then I was really in search of other families who were struggling like ours. And so all of a sudden I remember emailing my editor and saying, I think this structure could work. And there were so many Post-it notes, like this whole back wall, this was Post-it notes central. Like there were just so many Post-it notes. The great part was when I emailed my editor and said, I think we could organize it this way, like the family search and then the medicine and science, so that people understand what the families are going through and the wonderful part was when my editor, messaged me back and was like, yes, like how did we, like, yes, that is it. Because my editor was like in the trenches with me for so long. So like, I trusted that like, if it made sense to her, it was definitely the right way to go. But girl, it's hard. Structure is hard. But some people just are so good with that.
It just, honestly, the way it came together, it's like just this big, amazing puzzle that just, because I think that what you mentioned is something that I always connected to about your book is just like this way that we can grieve complicated relationships with people that we never did get a chance, or we never do get a chance to kind of mend that, you've said these things and you've made me feel this way. And, I need you to know that, and I need you to apologize and have a sit down on one-on-one. Like that doesn't happen a lot. It doesn't happen always. And you know, I'm
Mhm.
used to seeing Hollywood movies where what happens is
Mhm.
you're holding the hand on the deathbed, right? And they're like, I'm
Yeah.
sorry, I was so shitty, you know? And it's like, that doesn't happen. You know,
Mhm.
and I only say that because I had an aunt who passed away from cancer, and cancer is a thing in our family. Like, we have lost so
Mhm.
many people to cancer, and
Mhm.
I was with her when she took her
Mhm.
last breath, and I was just like, I wasn't with her because I was waiting for her to have that moment, but
Mhm.
I was with her because
Yeah.
she raised me, you know, and so
Yeah.
I connected
Yeah.
so deeply with that because we don't talk about that enough,
Yeah.
and the fact
Yeah.
that you were able to
We
include.
don't. Yeah. We don't. We have so many narratives and representations of these like perfect patients, these
Mhm.
angelic patients, these like, yeah, they issue last words of wisdom on their deathbed patients. And it's like,
Right.
who are those people? Like, they're not in my family. And I don't know many of them from like, family friends either. It's what my friends have gone through, I'm so sorry for your loss. And it's like, and it's also weird, right? Like, it's like, I don't know if that was weird for me to say that to you, but like, it's weird sometimes when people like say, I'm sorry about your auntie. And like, I totally appreciate it. I totally understand it. And I always still feel weird and guilty. Like, hey, we had a
Yeah.
complicated relationship. I always want to like be able to
Yeah.
give out like a little card. We had a complicated relationship. She didn't talk to
Yeah.
me for 7 years.
Yeah.
Blah blah blah. But like you, she raised me. She was there
Yeah.
that year I turned 7. She was there. So it's
Yeah.
just so complicated. And a really big part of the book for me that I was not expecting at all was that moment when I realized, damn, I'm grieving that the relationship that we didn't get to
Mm.
have, like that we're not getting a happy ending.
Mhm.
And queer folks, people of color, we want the happy ending, we deserve the happy ending, but we in reality we don't often get it. And that was such a moment for me when I realized, like, wow, that is such a huge part of the grief that I am carrying, that I had the little fantasy of like someday she's going to get through her homophobia.
Mm.
I have
Yeah.
another auntie who's like, she's doing really good on her homophobia right now. This week, she's having a good week,
I love that.
and right, girl,
Yeah.
you know how it is. And it's like she's doing good this week, and it's I don't know about next week or next year, but
Right.
this week she's doing good. But like it's oh, my tia Dora and I, we never got to that place. We never got to the place of her having a shift. I never got to, and we're not going to. It's not going to
Yeah.
happen.
Right.
And so that is a very strange grief too. Yeah, we have such like I don't know, such like almost fairy tales of grief in a way,
Yeah.
right? Like sort of these ideas of how it should be.
Yeah. No, because it's not, and I think that those things are often fed
Mm-hmm.
to us, and I think more like your stories. And I'm so glad that you were able to write that, and that someone said we need more of your story, because I think that just so good.
Yeah. Yeah, I wonder, I'm listening to I'm working on this like interview with Sandra Cisneros for this Buddhist magazine, and so I'm looking back at her book of essays, A House of My Own, and there's one essay in particular where she mentions someone saying to her like, "Oh, I would love to hear about that topic," and she was saying, how that like just someone saying that's wonderful gave her permission
Mm,
to write this really beautiful essay. It's like
yeah.
just how many of us at like all stages of our writing lives, and careers like need someone to just say, "I want that."
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No. But I know that we're running out of time, and I have so many more questions. But let's keep it going. Do you want to talk to us about any changes or additions to the paperback? I cannot wait to run out and go get my own copy. I don't have one yet, but I'm going to get one because, I'm one of those people that needs a copy of every like single edition of their favorite book. I also lend my books out. So that one I lend, not the hardback because it's signed now. And also, is there a Spanish edition coming? Or is there one already that maybe I don't know about?
Yeah, great questions. And I'll put that in the mail. And yeah, so one of the things that I do love about the paperback is that it does have an excerpt for my conversation with Terry Gross on Fresh Air, which was like a really surreal experience for me as a writer, because like, many writers, I've, spent my whole life listening to her and talk to different people. And it was an incredible experience to be able to just raise awareness about Chagas disease with this like radio host icon, so that was really incredible. And so I'm so happy that it's in there. And there is not yet a Spanish edition, but I am keeping my fingers crossed that we will have a Spanish publisher, because yes, I think it needs to be available in Spanish. And I would love to be able to give it to my family in Spanish. So fingers crossed.
Yeah, that was a selfish question, because I would also love to be able to give it to my family.
Yeah, I want to be able to give it to my aunties and cousins in Spanish itself. So it's, every time there's a book, I'm like, when's the Spanish edition coming out? So yeah.
Well, no, I love that. So just in terms of books that are there any that you would say your book is in conversation with?
Oh, that's such a great question. And, I definitely feel like my book is, I don't know, I feel like it's in conversation with every Latinx authored book in the US. Because I do think like, we have, sometimes I take a moment, like I taught a Latinx literature class this last semester, and I hadn't taught that in quite a number of years. And so I just had so many books to pick from for that class, and it was so painful. It was like, we can't read, you were just, oh my God, like it's like a taste, right, of Latinx literature. And so, so it just made me like so intensely aware of like how different it is today versus when, like, for example, 20 years ago when Colonized this first came out, the number of Latinx authored books, we have our own canon now. So I feel like mine is part of this like narrative nonfiction shelf, within that wider, landscape. So I feel like, I definitely see this book in conversation with Ingrid Roja Contreras' new memoir, The Man Who Could Move Clouds, because she's writing about, indigenous healing and family members in Colombia. And I feel like, my book has Colombia from a different perspective. And Patricia Engel's, incredible book, Infinite Country, a novel, a totally different perspective on this part of South America, right? But in terms of global health, there were two books that I read that I definitely feel like deeply in conversation with, and that's Tracy Kidder's book, Mountains Beyond Mountains, which was about kind of like a sort of book-length profile of Dr. Paul Farmer and all of his work around racial inequities, but not only in Haiti, but also globally. And that was a book that I just I leaned on a lot because, Tracy Kidder is an incredible nonfiction writer and has been for many generations, many years now. So as a writer, I was looking at his book. And then in terms of the content and how he wrote about inequities and advocacy, I was also looking at his book. And then Sonia Shah's book, Fever, which is like this like incredible history of malaria, was also so helpful to me. And she includes a little bit of like her family's perspective, in the sense that her, again, like this kind of like sense of malaria being so normalized in certain countries, and like, and so like the source of horror in other countries, mostly like, in the US, we don't want malaria, and in India, her cousins are like, you're writing about malaria? Like you're writing about like, I don't know, like, I think she says like, as if I was writing about like, a bunion on my toe or something. Like so mundane that why would you write a whole book about your toes or something, and that was super helpful. And her book is, she's just a beautiful, incredible. My book in conversation, her book is much more deeply scientific than mine is, much more science and data driven than mine is, but very, very helpful for me to see, how to balance that with narrative, so I learned a lot from reading her book as well. So those two books in particular, I always think of those in terms of, outside of the Latinx specific context, I'm in conversation with.
That's awesome.
And the second, somebody's asking what the second book, Fever by Sonia. I'll write it in the little chat.
I try to take a note, but I don't think I spelled the author's names right. So there we go.
Yeah.
That's from
And
my
she has a new
personal.
book out that I have not read, but I am dying to read, and it might be the next book that I read, which is about migration and how we accept the migration of animals, but we do not accept the migration of
Yeah.
people, and how the climate crisis is obviously causing, both, all mammals of all kinds, including us, to migrate, So I'm really excited about, I think the book came out last year, if I'm not mistaken. Oh, yes. Thank you, Charis. Yeah. Lots of info in the chat box.
There we go. It's right there. So I just want to say a huge quick thank you to you and all the work that you're doing. I'm going to ask one more question. I don't know if you are you considering joining patient advocacy groups, and getting in more within what clinical research is currently doing? I know that there's a lot of folks, and I'm putting on the other hat, my work 9-to-5 hat. There's a lot of need for patient advocates like you that are raising awareness and that have that experience. And so I was curious if you're at all, or you have, or you're doing it.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you're asking that question because, it's a huge question for me. It's a huge question for me because I was trained very traditionally as a journalist.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have already in some ways crossed over
Yeah,
a
that's
bit.
true.
And so one of the things that I have to contend with is that the minute that I cross over much more solidly into advocacy, I can't do traditional reporting. Then I'm in the realm of op-eds, right, and have to do that way, which is fine. I just haven't I haven't made a full decision, and I think part of it is that it's such a it's just a little psychological, conversation that I'm having all by myself. Like, oh, what does it mean if I do this? And what does it mean that I do that? But I am sort of strategizing and thinking of ways of supporting people right now. With my earnings from the book, thinking about sort of how to share those resources, with particular doctors and researchers who are doing work. Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. And I didn't mean to put you on the spot. I just thought about it and I was like, let me go ahead and just mention it and maybe nudge, but also
I understand.
do what's going to feel right for you. So there's plenty out there. So I know we went over 2 minutes over our time. Thank you everybody for joining us. Daisy, thank you so much for writing this wonderful book. Thank you to Charis Books and More, and thank you to the co-sponsor, the Feminist Women's Health Center, and I will bring Charis Books back on to tell you how to buy this wonderful book. And if you already have the hardback, you need the paperback edition. Just FYI.
Yes, it's a great one to lend out to folks. As Lupita was saying, I'm the same as you, Lupita. I like to have a lending copy and then my personal copy. So if that is like any of y'all in the audience, now is a great time to just click this teal button and buy your lending copy. Another great thing to do if you don't have the ability to buy it today is just to request it from your local public library. It really does help the author when you let your public library know that this is an important book. And it also helps the librarians who want to be doing more advocacy around these kinds of books to see audience demand, basically. So please do request it. Consider, if you like, buying a copy and donating it to a local high school library. It would not be inappropriate for smart high schoolers to read. So that's another great thing you could do in this age of book troubles. It's always a good thing to try and get books like this into the hands of smart young people as well. So thank you both so much for a beautiful conversation. I learned so much from this book and from this conversation, and I know a lot of other folks are going to continue to learn so much. So I hope that you both stay safe and well. And we really would love to have you both physically come to the store at some point. So keep that in mind for the future, please.
I would love that. Thank you.
Absolutely. Well,
thank you, everyone.
Take care. Thank you. Bye-bye.